Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. We're here in the Western Hemisphere in what seems like a never-ending winter. I'm not complaining about the fact that even though it's cold and we got dumped with snow here in southwestern Pennsylvania, it is sun shining for the second day in a row. And if you're anything like me, the sunshine, it almost doesn't matter what the temperature is. If you're in your car and you're running around and you get a little bit of sun on you, it at least gives me hope, and it just uplifts me from the doldrums a little bit. It really does. So for any of you that don't live in an area that's partly cloudy almost the entire winter, I understand the benefit of that. I used to live in Colorado, and it's a different climate. It's arid, so in the Denver area, semi-arid, so the cold doesn't feel as cold as it does here, but the sunshine really made a difference. So I do understand light therapy. I wanted to share 3 reading experiences I've had recently. I couldn't have chosen 3 books that I enjoyed more. All 3 of them. In my last video, I talked about slowing down my reading and almost sometimes being a monogamous reader. No. There was no monogamous reading going on. Well, at least 2 at a time. And then I was reading these 2 books because one is a nonfiction memoir and this one was fiction, but based on historical events, or at least including historical events. And then I read The Zweig Post Office Girl after I finished this. But I was gobbling these up. I had to stop myself from the gobbling because especially this book, I really wanted to slow myself down. I wanted to look things up. I went down rabbit holes. I didn't know anything about this Korean history having to do with the Jeju uprising, an uprising that happened on Jeju Island. I apologize for the pronunciation. I looked it up to see how to pronounce it verbally. It's an island off of the coast of South Korea, and in the mid to late 40s, there was opposition to the government, and there was a number of people that were protesting, and I don't know if it was a militia they were forming. I don't have enough details about it, but there was a so-called uprising, a resistance movement to the government happening on Jeju Island. It may have been in other parts of Korea also, of South Korea. This story talks about the uprising on Jeju Island, and like we've seen in other cases in history, the government didn't just go after the people that could be dangerous in the uprising, maybe armed even, I'm not sure, but they killed everyone, men, women, children. Mass executions and hiding bodies is what went on. The count is something like 30 to 40,000 people. This book, though, is about 2 friends in present day. And in Kanga and Insun are friends who are creatives. Kanga is a writer and Insun is a photographer, now turned carpenter. She is living on Jeju Island. Her family is from there. And they have talked about a collaboration that will honor those that were killed in the massacre. And you know from the beginning that Kanga suffers horribly from chronic pain. And and her friend, the book opens with her friend having been injured in a carpentry accident, and a very painful injury. And Insen, her friend, asks Kanga to go to her home on Jeju Island to save her dear pet bird. This is how the whole story starts. It's not a spoiler. When the whole journey to the island is what brings you into this writing, which is as lyrical as the White Book and as scriptive. The scenes of a snowstorm that hits on her journey are captivating. But the book really opens up when Kanga gets to the house. What has happened or hasn't happened with the bird, the dear bird, then we never really know what's real and what's not real. Because as Kanga needs to stay at the house. She's snowed in, so she's there longer than she would expect. And she's noticing different materials around the house, the research for the project that they were going to embark on. And Insen's family, a couple generations back, have been involved and affected by the massacre. And she starts to understand how that is by the things that she's finding in the house. But you're dropped into what you think is a dream sequence, because all of a sudden Insen is in the house with her, and Insen is leading her through the materials of her research and her families, and I really didn't know whether this was real or not, but actually I didn't care. I just thought, oh, we're in a dream sequence, I guess. And then you are real life experience from some of Insen's relatives. Some of that narrative is through letters that Insen has been able to collect. And some of it then just goes into a story of what's happened, what some people have seen with their own eyes, obviously anyone who survived, how a generation after tried to have the hidden bodies found and moved to a memorial that was very important to the families involved. And how many decades that's actually taken to happen. I'm never going to do this book justice. Please look at reviews of this book that talk so beautifully about it. I think the New York Times review does a good job, among others. I think the New York Times says that the book is intentionally disorienting, and yet I didn't feel like I couldn't keep reading it. It was so compelling, propelling. I just wanted to learn more about what happened, about Insen's family members, and the struggle that went on decades after to gather together and memorialize the people who had died in that massacre. Important for us to understand where these atrocities are happening, and they're a part of not my lifetime, but not far from it. Certainly within the 20th century. I talked about this book in my last video, that I'd had this in my hands, and it was Geraldine Brooks' memoir of her husband and their 35 years of marriage, because he died suddenly when he was 60 years old. You have to be in the right place to do so, to read a book like this. So I did want to experience Geraldine Brooks' writing, and I love memoirs. I one of my favorite memoirs is Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking, which I've read and then listened to several times. This is similar to that in that it's a writer writing a memoir, and her husband was also a writer, as was Joan Didion's husband, and a reporter. He is an American, she's an Australian, and you learn in the book that she would have loved to have lived on an island, this island, for instance, off the coast of Tasmania. This looks like a picture from the Southwest to us, to our American eyes, but that's a picture of some of the beautiful rocks on. In this book, she segments the chapters in regard to locations, and she does walk through in chapters that are broken or spaced apart the events surrounding her husband's death. He died suddenly from a cardiac event on a sidewalk, and but that's not the beginning or end of that story. So there's an entire story around that leading up to the sad event. And she was writing the book Horse at the time and really needed to get it to the editors. So that was an interesting story in the timeline. They had different ideas about where they wanted to live, where they could live based on their personality, but also on their work. And so she lives on an island off of Massachusetts and has horses. And that was as close as she was going to get to a remote island. She would rather be living on this island, whose name I can't remember, begins with an F. I love the way she broke up the story into the past and the present surrounding the event, and then almost most importantly, the reason that this picture is a picture from the island is on the front is she finally a year later goes to this island, Finley Island maybe, and she's finally able to be in a space that she can really remember and memorialize her husband and their relationship. She has the space, she has the emotional ability to do that. And that was just so beautiful. I cannot wait to read her book, Horse. I love horses. I have had a lifelong love of horses. So yeah, I'll definitely get to her book, Horse. I highly recommend this one. All right, and I just finished last night The Post Office Girl by Stefan Zweig. One of you wonderful viewers commented that you're reading this right now and that you've read another one at least. And you were asking if I was going to get to another one. I will definitely be reading another Stefan Zweig, but not right away. I'm going to space it out. Maybe the chess story is next. But I think I'd said that this book is kind of like, it could be the framework of like an Elizabeth Taylor. I'm just picking Elizabeth Taylor. An Elizabeth Taylor story where a young woman who's taking care of her sick mother in a small town in Austria, is it? World War I, Austria. And she has no reason to believe her life will ever change. She's poor, but she thankfully has this job as a post office clerk in her small town. And yeah, her life is just drudgery, and circumstances align within her family that her aunt, I believe, I'm forgetting who this is, that somehow she gets invited because someone else can't make it to join her relative I'm going to say it's her aunt, in the Swiss Alps on vacation. And so she takes leave from her post office job, something she had never done because she didn't need to. She didn't have a reason to, and she needed the money. But she had some vacation time, and she was able to join her aunt. And it was a real Cinderella story because her aunt wants to get her some nice clothes and take her to the hairdresser and all those things that I think you'd want to do if you were in this time and place. And it's no skin off her nose to do this for Christine. One thing leads to another in the hotel, this Swiss Alps hotel life, and she gets mistaken for, I think, the name of the relative that was supposed to come. So instead of her last name, Fraulein, or something like that, they attached the last name of, I think, the relative that was supposed to come but didn't. So she's known as like Christian Van Bulen, which is this wealthy name. And so she falls in with the wealthy set of young people because, of course, they all want to know her. She's connected with tons of money. They accept her as one of their own. She can't believe this because she doesn't have the upbringing to know what to do and to know what to say. But she gains more confidence with the clothes she's wearing is being accepted, how she looks is being accepted, and she's just having the time of her life. Her aunt and uncle are like, okay, settle down a little bit. But then they realize that she's been mistaken for like an heiress, a young heiress, and they want to pull her out of that situation. They feel like she's gone off the rails. She's gotten too wild. What they thought would be a nice break for her has turned into something where they just don't want her to go wrong. We don't know what we're going to do here, but something has to happen. She then meets Ferdinand, who's a bitter war veteran, and what she does decide, because she thinks maybe this trip is over, we don't know, is she's not going back. And part of the story is about that. The writing here is, again, it's so mature and nuanced and sentence by sentence thought about. And that's really the joy, I think, for me, of Stefan Zweig's writing. I have an example. Let's see what it is. Her passionate goodwill is irresistible. Everyone around her feels her ardor. And after about 3 or 4 days, everyone from Lord Elkins down to the last bellhop and elevator boy have decided that this Fräulein von Bühlen is an enchanting creature, a charming girl. And she feels their looks of approbation and takes pleasure in being looked at, feels it as an intensification of her own existence and her daring to exist. And the affection that surrounds her makes her happier still. It's that kind of writing. I had so many marks, so many stickies in this book. When she thinks that her fantasy is over, the thing that was supposed to just be a fun trip, and then she ends up being put on a pedestal, when she thinks it might be over, and she then starts spending more time with Ferdinand. The thing that happens during the end of the book is very close to what Stefan Zweig and his wife actually had to do to escape the Nazis. So he's writing from a place you can tell that he's already been and he's had to think through. And that's what also makes the writing in this book so rich. I just can't recommend this writer enough. All right, one more thing. I have a lot of holds coming to me from the library, of course. I don't know which ones I'm going to keep or which ones are going to stick, but I just started listening to an episode of the Mookse and the Grapes podcast. If you listen to book podcasts, I cannot recommend that one enough. Paul and Trevor talk about books, and they have been my companion anytime that I've been out doing yard work, when I'm around the house, when I'm on a long car trip. But they had joining them the essayist, poet, author, Alyssa Gabbard, a favorite essayist of mine. And she was talking about something she had been reading recently, and she was reading The Price of Salt by Patricia Highsmith. One of my favorite books. And since I had such a great time rereading things this past, I'll say 12 months, because I just reread something in January, I thought that's a great idea to reread it. I don't know if I ever talked about it on BookTube, because I think I read it right before I started my BookTube channel like 2.5 years ago. And it got me thinking, because she was talking about this book in the discussion, in the conversation. Patricia Highsmith's Diaries and Notebooks. Alyssa Gabbard has this book and she hasn't read it yet. And she's wondering, why is it Diaries and Notebooks? 1941 to 1995. Yes, 55 years of Diaries and Notebooks. I read this book about 2 Januaries ago. It was right before I started my BookTube channel. And it took like 3 months. I read it in dribs and drabs at night. And it was such a great companion through the winter time. The reason that she has diaries and notebooks is that the notebooks were for her writing ideas. And they were two distinct physical things. And then eventually she just joined them together. I cannot tell you the experience I had watching her develop as a writer. And The Price of Salt especially is such a special book because it was the second book she had published. Her first book, Strangers on a Train. Alfred Hitchcock bought the rights to make a movie, and her publishers just wanted her to write something more, like The Talented Mr. Ripley, for instance, which would come later. But she needed to read The Price of Salt. And because of the fact that it's eventually an attraction between two women, and this was probably, what was it, the 40s maybe she was writing this, or 50s, she had to publish it under a pseudonym for a long time. And I don't think it was until 1990 that it was revealed that she wrote the book. So, and talk about line by line, page by page writing. It's that kind of writing, and in my opinion. So I just wanted to bring this up. I do want to reread this again. I thought I was going to do that in January, but I don't know. I don't know if I will right now, but I definitely will. Okay. All right, friends. Thank you for joining me. Please join me in the conversation below. I love your engagement. It's why I do this. This is why I'm here talking to my phone, is that your engagement is amazing, is just so important to me. Please let me know if you've read Geraldine Brooks. And of course, keep talking about Stefan Zweig, because I am absolutely loving it. And have you read We Do Not Part? What are your thoughts? Thanks for joining me here. I hope to see you on the next